Mr. City Attorney, and say good morning.
You are live
Great.
now.
Good morning, everybody. For the record, this is the Thursday, July 11th, 2024 regular meeting of the Financial Advisory Commission for the City of Annapolis. I'm Fred Sussman, Chair. With us from the Commission are Jim Cardillo, Vice Chair, Ed Meehan, and Frank Brown. We also have with us Mike Miles, City Attorney, Alderman Ross Arnett, Alderman Brooks Chandlermeyer, and from the Finance Department, Finance Director Jody Dickinson, who's with us remotely, and actually by phone, and Kim Moronsky. And finally, we wouldn't be able to produce this without the help of Madeline from City of Annapolis TV. So thanks, everybody, and welcome. First order of business, review and approval of the agenda. Are there any, I know there is one revision to the agenda, and that is removing approval of minutes of June 13th, 2024 from the agenda. We will take those minutes up at our next meeting. I haven't had a chance to fully review and distribute them yet. So that will be removed from the agenda. Any other revisions or corrections to the agenda? Seeing or hearing none, entertain a motion to approve the agenda as revised.
Mr. Chair, I move that we proceed with the agenda as amended.
Okay, Frank Brown, second by Jim Cardillo. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, raise your right hand or signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Agenda is approved. Reports. Jody sent me some notes for her report. The bond ordinance was introduced to the City Council on Monday and referred to the Financial Advisory Commission for comment. We will take that up at our next meeting, which I think will probably be in August. If not August, it'll be September. And she also advises that the vacant positions in the finance department have been approved and filled. Jody, anything else?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Which
What did
one?
you
I said, the last thing I said was you advised me that the two vacant positions in your department have been filled. And then I asked if there was anything else other than the bond ordinance.
No, those are the two things that I would have talked about in my finance report today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions of Jody's report? Hearing none, move on to city manager. Nobody from the city manager's office here, so we'll move on to audit committee. Jim, anything from the audit committee today?
The audit committee met on June 17th. That was the last meeting. Two items of particular note are one, we are continuing to identify new candidates for vacancies on the audit committee. We've brought one on. Another one will soon follow, I understand. Alderman Arnett is working on that. Secondly, Jody presented us with some information with regards to the engagement the city has with its external auditors, UHY. UHY had come back to them for a fee renegotiation. And I think we achieved a happy middle ground between a flat out large increase and no increase. It was to everyone's satisfaction, I think. So happy that we can retain this audit firm they've now completed 2 years of our audit and they're about to start the third. And they're very competent, and we've actually increased the amount of services that we're utilizing them for as the work expands. So
Great, thanks for your report, Jim. Does anybody have any questions of Jim and his audit committee report? Okay, again, as we say almost every meeting, if there's anybody who would like to replace Jim on the audit committee, he would be more than happy to give that up to a worthy successor. So
Thank you very much.
you're welcome, and thanks for your service.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go briefly to unfinished business. I'm going to defer spending affordability for a few minutes. With respect to the collective bargaining process letter, if you recall, at the last meeting, the FAC considered 3 proposed collective bargaining agreements, and we recognize that there seemed to be an issue with the process for engaging the Financial Advisory Commission in review of collective bargaining agreements before they're approved by the council. And we have said that we would put together a little bit more comprehensive letter to the city council with recommendations, and then bring it to this group for consideration and approval. Ed Meehan put together a draft, sent it to me. I haven't had an opportunity to fully review it. And after I review it, I will send it off to the FAC members for their review, comment, and please editing as you feel appropriate. Because I value everybody's input. We all come to things from a little bit different perspective. So I welcome that, and hopefully I can get that out to you in the next week. I'm going to defer spending affordability, and for a couple minutes, Alderman Chandlermeyer is here with us, graciously giving his time to talk to us about the recently completed land and infrastructure evaluation study. He brought this to us last year before the study had either begun or had really gotten underway, and promised that once the study was completed, he would come back to us and kind of share the results and have a little discussion with us as to how at least he feels the FAC can use the results of that study in its work, and how perhaps the city administration, city council might be able to benefit from the results of that study. So with all that, and thank you for being able to be here with us early, even though it's because of the NATO summit that you can't get into DC. But our gain, their loss. So
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jessamine.
let me turn it over to you, and just I don't know how many of the FAC members have had either attended the briefing or had an opportunity to review the briefing online. The city council, I found it very illuminating. I can't say that I was overly surprised by a lot of the results, but it was still very illuminating. So with that, Alderman Chandlermeyer, welcome, and let me turn the floor to you for a few minutes.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. So I am going to give the Cliff Notes version of this and screen share my screen here. Everybody see me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Excellent.
There you go.
So this is the Cliff Notes version. I do highly recommend the members of the committee who were not able to attend to the briefing or at least watch the recording of the briefing yet, take a look at it. The whole meeting was about 2.5 hours, but this presentation took up the first hour, and the rest is just question and answers. Really interesting stuff if you want to keep on, but the first hour of this was the bread and butter. I'm giving a much more Cliff Noted version. So this part of the presentation I've shown you all before, approximately like 10 months ago. This is the total taxable value of the city of Annapolis based on property. This is kind of compared to if we were to gauge the mile per gallon or the gas miles of vehicles by total tank miles, which we don't really do. Instead, we do miles per gallon, which is taxable value per acre. So that's kind of the mile per gallon equivalent of the city itself. Here is a bird's eye map with the taxable value per acre. The higher the properties, the more taxable value that they provide. The tallest one right there is Park Place condos, and then right next to it is downtown Annapolis. These are actually the most valuable properties in all of Anne Arundel County, which is really interesting to see. And then some interesting data just for our information is despite only taking up only about 2% of all of the land in Anne Arundel County, the city actually provides 8% of all of Anne Arundel County's value, which is we're punching above our weight class compared to the rest of the county, which is pretty good to know. But we all kind of knew that at one level or another. I'm just sort of zooming by things just to get to the real meat of this. Here's a whole map of Anne Arundel County. So taxable versus exempt land, about 19% of our land is exempt from tax. We traditionally say this is a very high amount, but actually compared to other cities, this seems to be pretty standard, which is information I did not have before we got this study. On average, a lot of cities have about 20% of their land taxable. Sorry, there's a lot of stuff on and value per acre. So here's some interesting stuff based on how folks might normally associate value with the value of the property itself or the wealth of the property itself. In this circled area, we have 2 properties in Eastport. This one here is Nautilus Point. And Nautilus Point is a lower income area. The apartments are a lot older. They cost less compared to other properties in the city, but they end up producing a significantly higher value or tax value than some of the surrounding areas that are traditionally seen as wealthier, despite taking up similar geographic areas. So that's the total value per acre. So this is kind of the meat of the project itself. We have the land use types and what value do they bring into the city. Walmart is one of the examples that they use because it's something that most Americans can be familiar with. While the city does not have a Walmart in it, we do have this type of development style. Big box, strip mall, giant parking lot. We can look at the Kohl's, for example, in the city, on the city county. That's this type of development. That's the Bay Ridge Giant. That's the Eastport Shopping Center. And these types of property, Walmart's on average have about a $1.1 million per acre property value, despite taking up massive acreage. In the city of residential, our average value in the city is about 1.8 million per acre. They average this out by going through each single family home, the average value of each single family home in the city. The average multifamily value per acre is 2.5. Here's a couple different breakdowns of some of the properties. We have the Eastport Quadplex or Triplex over here at 3 billion. Bell West is 10.6 billion, downtown 15, and Bowman Court is around 2.5. And townhomes in the city on average are some of our bigger hitters. They have an average of about $4.2 million per acre. So our most valuable types of residential property, townhomes and multifamily, whether it's larger apartments like Nautilus Point or triplexes, mixed use spaces like Bell West or downtown, are illegal on the majority of our land. So that is cutting off a lot of our potential revenue sources and ability to fund services. This is Park Place, the peak productivity, because it is mixed use. It's 127 million per acre. It has offices, retail, restaurants, residential, all within a very contained, walkable space. This is the type of development that, as we can see, is not just the revenue generator for Annapolis, it's the revenue generator for all of Anne Arundel County. This is the #1 revenue generator in all of Anne Arundel. We need to really stress that. There's a good example. So here's kind of the breakdown of the value per acre. Again, townhomes and multifamily tend to be larger revenue generators for the city over single family, which is the only type of land development allowed on the majority of our land. It's just some residential. One of my favorite facts, we have Heritage and Hunt Meadow, wealthier neighborhoods actually generate less revenue per acre than Clay Street, which is seen as traditionally impoverished. It's an area that the city and county really abused with eminent domain, tearing up a large chunk of its wealth to build parking garages and offices. And yet it is still generating more revenue per acre than some of these wealthier, more suburban style. So the main meat of this presentation, though, that I'm going to show to you guys that can get a little more to the point. Stop sharing that page and share to actually get down into our infrastructure studies is. So this is a map of our total infrastructure use in the city and our spending. So we have general government spending is about 115 million a year. Water infrastructure, we spend about 16 million. Sewer, we spend about 18. Roads, we're spending about 12.8 million, and stormwater, we're spending about 2.1. We have a city that is 6 square miles. We have 260 lane miles of road and 106 miles of sidewalk that we spend $12.8 million per year on. This was as a way to kind of visualize this. This amount of lane miles gets us from Annapolis up to like Boston, if you were to stretch all those out to a straight line. Water infrastructure, I didn't know this until the study was done. We actually have some maintenance, some water infrastructure that we cover that goes out into the county, like into Hillsmere, into some other parts of Anne Arundel County, which we are not really getting that value from the county. So that is a conversation that we can start having. And sewer is pretty internalized. We spend about 18 million on that. Stormwater, we have about 101 miles of pipeline, and we spend about 2.1 million. So all in all, our infrastructure costs is around $47 million. That's what we spend. But what we should be spending is a lot higher to be held to national standards of keeping this infrastructure maintained, which we are kind of seeing now with roads, potholes crumbling, sidewalks in inadequate shape, sewer breaks and leaks and water breaks and leaks happening very alarmingly consistently. We should be, because we are not able to keep up with that maintenance. And that's how we're able to make it look like our city budget stays in the black. But when you actually get down into what we should be spending on this to keep it at a adequate standard, we are very short on everything except for stormwater. So here's the general revenue per acre, map, about 70 million. Property tax. So this is all revenue side, but then we get into the cost expenditure data, which this is what we are currently getting, and this is what we should be spending. So this is not at current spending levels. This is at the levels to make sure our infrastructure stays at an adequate standard. Here is the kind of worm's eye view of what they show for it. And when compared and contrasted, we are getting in 144 million, but we need to be spending 164 million just to keep our infrastructure at an adequate standard. It's just kind of a general map of revenue versus expenditures. Cost per acre. So as we can see, while we do spend some more money on infrastructure in our downtown and in our Park Place area than like lower suburban neighborhoods, they more than make up for it in revenue, while the lower density areas tend to not. And here is probably my favorite map of everything in the city that is actually revenue positive and revenue. Only 23% of our lands can actually pay for our infrastructure and services. Downtown Park Place hitting well above their weight class. Here is Bell West in Annapolis, a mixed-use development over on Upper West Street that is towering above the rest in financial productivity. Here is, I can't zoom in as effect. Oh, there we go. Here is my neighborhood, which I'm embarrassed to say is not financially solvent, but the nearby Saltaire neighborhood and the North Green condos, both areas that I'm not going to call low income, but lower cost than a lot of the city provides, they're actually financially productive. Here's my old neighborhood at Annapolis Overlook, a mixture of condos and townhomes. And despite being a cul-de-sac, actually produces more revenue than the city. And then here is Hunt Meadow. These are the single family areas of Hunt Meadow, and these are the townhome areas. This is the Bay Ridge Giants. These are those little cottage style apartments, and then the regular style apartments here behind it. Here's the drive-through of the bank drive-through. And here is the Starbucks drive-through that I got my cursor over right now. I hope folks can't see that behind the front of the senior center. So these drive-through properties are actually financially negative. I say setting up legislation that we're also working. Yeah, so the more urbanized areas of the city, the areas that are built before zoning or the areas that were built in a new urbanist fashion, mixed use fashion, or at least more urbanist, are producing more revenue than they cost. And the large single family mandated areas are not able to pay for their own services and infrastructure when we look at revenue. This is the cost per acre map, or what they call the worm's eye view of it all. Again, you can spot these areas here are the downtown, but when you compare it to what they pull in revenue wise, they more than make up for it. So here's just a couple of the areas that they pointed out. Park Place condos, West Street mixed use, Bell West. Here's some others. Heritage, the West Annapolis Shopping Center, which is kind of like the main street, I guess, of West Annapolis. They are a revenue positive stretch of land. In Eastport, we have Nautilus Point area, some of the condos and maritime properties along the edge of the water. 4th Street and the Eastport sail lofts are financially positive. The Annapolis Industrial District, which is pretty interesting. And something I wasn't quite expecting, but hey, the data is the data, is that new installation on Forest Drive, that office park that was installed about somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago, despite having a massive parking lot, is actually financially positive. But considering how much weight, consider when you compare that to how much acreage this takes up compared to commercial areas here in West Annapolis, these are a lot higher, despite taking up similar acres. So that is kind of the cost per value breakdown of it. But one of the alarming things, if I can find it, I will try to show the group, is they have a breakdown from the main presentation on when the city actually did most of its growing. And that kind of gives a really interesting breakdown of when most of our infrastructure was built. So one of the main takeaways, while I look for the slide, is the majority of the city actually grew when we annexed West Annapolis, Parole, Eastport, and large chunks of land that used to just be fields and forests and farms around the 50s. And then most of that infrastructure and roadway got built in the 70s. So that 70s infrastructure bill is coming due. And when we see the compounding of maintenance on that, we basically are not going to be. It's going to be such a massive hit to the city. So here we go. Annexation history. This is just kind of general, interesting news. I apologize, I'm rambling, but the final presentation, I assure you, is a lot more interesting. So here's a map of our general population, all the way back from 1820 when we had first started getting some census data to 2020. So this is 200 years of Annapolis population. Currently we're about 41,000. And here is kind of a general city growth plot. So here was the original Annapolis downtown historic and the population density of around 4% per 3 square mile. Then we expanded out a little bit more in the 1800s to 1920 into some areas like Murray Hill. Population density grew a little bit more as the city grew. Expanded a little bit more. Population density grew. And then we did a little bit of expansion again. This is all very organic city expansion as the city kind of grew up from a colonial town into a more early modern city. Population dropped a little bit, density dropped a little bit, but not dramatically. Then with the massive annexations that we did in 1951, our population density plummeted. So we actually have a population density now that is, or we had a population density after that massive annexation that was lower than our 1820s population, which is just fascinating stuff. And then the most recent annexations around 1950 to 2000. So our population density has kind of gradually built back up a little bit, but we are still much lower than where we were at our peak of density. We are actually currently as dense now as we were in 1855. So one of the issues, though, that we get into when the infrastructure for those areas actually got built is these were the properties when they were first infrastructures when they were first built, 1890, 1910, 1930, 1950, 1970, 1990, 2010. They say 2030, but look, these are every 20 years. So this is just stuff built in between 2010 and today. So those roads built in 1910 around the black box here, they hit their infrastructure lifestyle in 1970. So on top of all the new roads that we were building and infrastructure that we were building in 1970, on top of that, we had to do a significant amount of maintenance and installation and cost here in for those 1910 infrastructure. And then that infrastructure that hit its lifestyle in 1970 is coming due in 2030, along with all this other stuff that we built here in 1970. Essentially, the city is facing a financial cliff with the infrastructure come due built in the 70s sprawl style by 2030. I pitched this as we just passed our comprehensive plan, which does open up opportunities for a lot more financially productive land use, but comprehensive plans don't actually change what the development styles and patterns are, as we can tell from our 2009 comprehensive plan, where we really didn't follow that advice and kept a lot of the status quo. The 2009 comp. So look, I am presenting this to you to kind of come forward and go, we are going to be introducing legislation over the rest of this term and probably next term if I'm still here, to encourage more financially productive land use. I will be coming to the Financial Advisory Commission for that with that presentation in mind to just kind of showcase to you all, this makes financial sense. Please support it so that we can kind of gradually get a more sustainable source of revenue and expenditures. That's it for my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to do my best to answer them.
Thank you very, very much. Greatly appreciated. Let me ask this, do you by any chance have the PowerPoint you can share with us?
Yes, I am happy to. I will share both the Cliff Notes one and the longer general one. I will give a warning on that longer general one. That makes a lot more sense with Joe Manicosi, the president and presenter of Urban 3, actually going along with it with the presentation. What I recommend is have two windows open, one with that general presentation and then one with Joe actually presenting it to us, and you can kind of follow along.
If you could get it to Kim, she'll distribute it to the commission.
Yes.
Greatly appreciated. So bottom line, what does that mean? That the city should be looking at more high density commercial development?
Gradual infill. Look, things that process of infill development here in the city is difficult at best. We take a look at the several attempted redevelopments of certain commercial spaces, and it has taken literally since I moved to the city, and they're still going on. So things that would make that easier, things that would make building townhomes, duplexes, triplexes easier or legal to build should be encouraged, because as we see, those are the type of developments that can actually pay for their own services and infrastructure. And I'm not saying this as one for one, but the majority of single family homes, which is all that we are allowed to build in the majority of our city, regardless of how much value that they have worth, unless they're pretty much along the waterfront, can't pay for their own infrastructure. I'm not saying we take those away, but I am saying we allow other choices to be built there, to allow a sort of gradual filling in of things. You know how the way Annapolis was until that 1950 expansion, annexation.
Questions for Alderman Sandemeyer?
James has his hand up.
Pardon?
James from his tropical paradise has his hand up.
Yeah, I did have two questions, Alderman. First, your analysis at the end indicated, the application of this is to encourage more financially productive lands. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that means is that a rezoning? Please
Yes,
elaborate.
it's rezoning and allowing for more flexible uses of spaces.
Okay, thanks. And then
there's also other things that kind of contribute to this sort of sprawl style development. Parking requirements are a thing I harp on because, well, they really block a lot more productive use of city land financially. And what we see from that is that the neighborhoods that are the most financially productive downtown were built far before things like zoning and parking. And those are not just the best revenue generators in the city, they're the best revenue generators in Anne Arundel County.
Yeah, so that was interesting, that 2%, 8% dichotomy there. That was interesting.
That is absolutely fascinating to me, despite taking up such a small amount of the city's land. So we can all take solace in the fact that city land use is better than Anne Arundel County land use. But as we can see, we're still about $20 million in the hole annually for our own infrastructure and land use. So I also want the county to do this study, because I think what they're going to be staring at is a lot more apocalyptic than what we have. We have a problem, but they have a conundrum. A problem has a solution. A conundrum just has an outcome. So we have a way forward. Anne Arundel County is looking at some really hard choices that I do hope this current administration, the next one, and the following can try to resolve. But their comp plan is going a lot less smooth than ours, believe it or not.
Okay,
Thanks.
Jody?
Fred,
Oh,
I'm sorry. I just have one more thing. I love just data in general, because you look for applicability of the data to other factors. Early on, you mentioned that about 19% of the city's land is exempt. Do we know what percentage is state government out of that 19%? Because I'm trying to look at the applicability of this data towards what the city receives from the state, that's called the pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes, which at one point was lower, and then again it got higher at one point, and then it reduced. And so, and now it using this data, it would seem to me that it doesn't even get anywhere near, as Ross says, it doesn't get anywhere near what services they use and what the value of that land is. So I'm looking for, could we apply some of this data to this negotiation with the pilot?
I'm sure we could. I don't actually know a very specific answer off the top of my head. I wish I had asked that question during their presentation.
We do have an answer from 2015 data work that Joe Budge did. And actually the surprising thing out of that work, the state is important, but schools also an important part, but 501c3s are a non-trivial part of that non-taxable.
No, I agree. I agree. I was looking for the carve out of that 19% that is state government land.
Yeah, we have that from SStat data, that work that Joe Budge did quite a while ago. It probably needs to be updated.
Yeah, so I can also email Joe as an example to try and get like a breakdown of how much of that Joe Manicosi, Joe is a Joe Manicosi, Urban Threes
Urban Three,
presenter.
right?
Um, and try to get how much of that like tax exempt breakdown. But one of the interesting things that he presented to us is that's not exactly a shockingly high number when you compare it to a lot of other jurisdictions. So look, I'm not saying that's not a contributing factor to our infrastructure financial woes, but it's not something that we are particularly unique on, because there are other jurisdictions that have a lot more tax exempt land than we do. But
Yeah, that was interesting to learn. I thought we were an outlier as well, and I'm happy to know that we're not.
yeah, but I do think this does give us a little bit more ammo. Maybe that's the wrong phrasing when talking about government buildings. A little bit more information
Yes,
on
in order to calculate what the value of that payment is, and how to best come up with a mutually agreeable amount.
exactly.
Jody, you've been very patient with your hand. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So I wanted to add a couple of things to the presentation. Keep in mind that this analysis is considering only property tax revenue and not other sources of revenue. So although I do think that those properties are probably generating overall more revenue, I don't think the difference is as stark as it seems, because the differences in the amount of income taxes generated by the different areas may fill that gap a little and not make the difference so stark. And then I also wanted to add that when we looked at this presentation with DPW on a virtual call a few days ago, we questioned the amounts that we're spending and how they calculated those. And so that, where they compare what we're spending versus what we should be spending, I think that's a little larger difference than actually exists. And DPW should be a participant on any conversation you have about infrastructure and how they feel our infrastructure is behind, et cetera. And third, we do have the SStat data. The pilot is now between $800,000 and $900,000, so it's not insignificant. And the state property does not use all of the services that we offer our other citizens. So those are just some things to consider. And I'm probably going to have to sign off here pretty soon. So I just wanted to interject those thoughts. And then when we get the final report, that the company was going to send us the source of their data so we could make sure that we iron out any differences we have in what they say we're spending.
Thank you very much, Jody. Greatly appreciate your comments. Anybody have any questions for Jody? Alderman, I'll get to you in a second. No, okay, next hand raised was Alderman Arnett, and then Frank Brown.
So just a couple of interesting factoids. First of all, I agree with Jody that there are some mitigating factors, but still, I think the data are pretty compelling. They tell a story that we need to pay attention to. That 2%, 8% is interesting, and it is also the number that Teresa Wellman gave us about the amount of residents in the HUD district, which is the city represents 2%. The amount of public housing in the city is 8%. So it's just an interesting happenstance that those parallel. The last thing that I would say, and this is always the tough thing, is you can value in dollars, but there are other values too. And that is the community character, the quality of life, and those sorts of things. And nobody gets a handle on that. But if you were to look at these numbers and take them at face value, we really should de-annex Ward 5, Ward 7, a lot of the wards that are the ones that are the lower contributor, higher costs. And actually, that's a conversation Joe Budge and I had years ago. Why did we annex? And in the new comp plan, we're talking about even more annexation. And that seems to me that we are talking about buying more latent liability, infrastructure liability down the road.
So we don't need to de-annex. We can just allow to thicken up. Like this isn't as I said earlier, like this isn't a conundrum. This is something that we do have solutions for. We do have solutions for how to start getting more valuable properties, and this comp plan kind of gives us a guide. Excuse me. So like de-annexing, I don't know the process of it. It's not something I have any real expertise. It's not something I've ever really analyzed on. I don't really process what we have to do to take it. Some neighborhoods may enjoy that. Some neighborhoods probably won't.
Ward
I
8 is
personally,
volunteering.
a certain demographic of them are, yes. I don't think we need to do that though. I think we have a very general guideline for some steps that we can take to keep the city largely looking boundary wise what it is, and just start having more productive use of our land financially. As for things like quality of life, this is what everybody kind of pitches when change comes forward. Look, the status quo is going to lead to some very painful decisions that are going to make that quality of life drop very significantly in the not so distant future. For me, quality of life is having a road that's not going to break down, that's not slowly crumbling, and having sidewalks that I don't have to worry about tripping on all the time, and having stable water and sewer access. We're starting to see in some of those areas in that large annexation with like the road quality and sidewalk quality, we're seeing that hit already. And we can't really deny that. We can try to go, well, it's
I don't think
fine.
you
Like,
and I
oh, it's
should get
fine.
into a debate here for the fact, but we can have this. But sidewalks and roads are not the principal aspect of quality of life. It's the nature of the neighborhoods, or as was discussed at the council, community fabric. But we can have this not in the fact time.
Well, the main thing is we can't really put a value on that. We can't pay our
Yes, we can.
debts. We can't pay for our infrastructure by going, thank you for installing new pipeline for us, company. We're going to pay you, and look how quaint our neighborhood is. That's silly. We can't do it that way. We have to be able to cover our expenses. I am far from a run of government as a business type of guy, but if we don't have a positive balance sheet at the end of the day, we are either going to have to declare bankruptcy or get real creative on how we get it balanced at the end of the day.
I would argue this is the perfect segue to spending affordability.
Well, before we get there, Frank Brown has some questions with his hand up. Frank?
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation, Alderman. I think it's very good. I remember when we saw it before. It's a very fascinating document to look at. But following up on what Jim Cardillo was saying earlier, I'm kind of surprised that you say we're not unique in the amount of untaxable land that we have compared to other jurisdictions. Is there some place that I can go to look and see what the comparisons are?
So Frank, you kind of cut off there for me a little bit, but I think your question was, is there a place that you can go and see what some of those other jurisdictions that are similar to us in that amount of untaxable land? Was that your question? I
Yes.
do not know them off the top of my head. If you watch the presentation, Mr. Manicosi gets into some of those jurisdictions. Excuse me.
Okay.
But I can also go ahead and email the Urban 3 team to see if they can get me that info that I can send over to FACT.
I guess I'm just a very proud Annapolitan, and I think we're unique in the whole country. But
We
it's
are
just
very
curious.
unique in some of, like every wonderful jurisdiction, we are very unique. And the lead into that was like every other wonderful jurisdiction. Look,
Wait,
we're a unique
I
place.
caught that. Yeah.
Look, we're a
You say
unique place.
every. You say
Yeah.
every. There's only one. Us.
It's the same way in how I'm a very unique and proud individual in a sea of unique and proud individuals. Look, I love this city. This is the city where my grandfather went to the Naval Academy. This is the city where my grandparents fell in love. There's a reason I came here when I graduated high school or when I graduated college. But we also have a lot of things that are the same as literally every other city on this planet. Um, some things are just the way they are, no matter where you are.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Alderman, thank you very, very much. Before we move on, anybody else have any further questions for Alderman Schellenmeyer or comments about the subject matter or the presentations? If not, again, Alderman, thank you very much and look forward to hearing more about this in the months and years to come.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to go get some more
Have a
coffee
good day.
too.
Okay.
Thank you.
I know that Alderman Arnett is chomping at the bit, and he said, Fred, are we gonna get to spending affordability today? I said, it's on the agenda. That's all I will say. I know that Ed's been looking at it again for us, and he's gonna lead, whatever discussion we ultimately have. Ed, are you prepared and ready and want to start delving into that today, or would you prefer to wait for our next meeting?
Well, I think we can at least spend a little bit of time on this, and I can tee it up. I think kind of briefly when Alderman Arnett said that presentation was the perfect introduction. That was exactly what I was thinking. I think having it in this order could not have been better. So just to set the table again, okay, in a brief way, we've talked about this off and on for quite a long time.
And
And
can I stop you for 1 sec?
oh, sure. Yeah, of course.
And that is, in broadest terms, we to you or Alderman Arnett, what do we mean when we're talking about spending affordability? I think we all ought to have a common understanding as to what that term means, for going forward with the discussion. So.
But my point of view, my definition would be as simple as, what are the city's needs and how can the city meet that financially? So you can rank needs, desires, priorities in some fashion, and you've got to rack it up like I think any ordinary budget. How do I accomplish that? Where do I sacrifice? Where do I plan for the longer term? And to the extent the revenue is falling short of what is ranked as the top priorities, if that occurs, then you really need to think about how do I enhance revenue sources, which ties right back to the presentation that we just had, because there may be opportunities to tweak revenue to meet what are perceived as needs, and then to address what are perceived as maybe not needs, but as desires. Because one of the things we did talk about, again, in that presentation, which I thought was a perfect segue, is quality of life concepts, which it takes money to achieve certain quality of life, but we also have things that can't be avoided. If we have crumbling infrastructure, that's a cost that's building up on us, and it needs to be addressed. So to me, that's what it is spending affordability is identifying the needs, racking that up against our revenue sources, seeing where there is a mismatch, and how do we address that mismatch.
Okay, we'll stop for a sec. Alderman Arnett, generally, do you agree with what Ed Meehan has said?
Yeah, I think very simply, it's do the revenue sources support the increase in spending? or the spending needs. And that's what the models all look at.
Okay, so I think we're on the same wavelength. So go ahead, Ed. Sorry for interrupting.
Sure, no problem, no problem at all. So just to sort of take us back where we've been, and then I think level set just a bit, is we have, talked about this concept and, should something be addressed, right? Is it a problem that needs attention, or is it a good idea that it would be useful to devote some attention to? So the first question is, should something of this nature be done? Should there be a new function? Should there be a new focus? I think that answer, again, has been clear for a long time. In the course of our discussions here, I did not perceive any viewpoint that this is unnecessary. We don't need to focus on this. So should there be attention to this concept? That question, I think, has long ago been answered. Everybody seems to support that, and more or less zealously. But I don't see any. I don't hear any negative voices or any opposition to that kind of a concept. To me, there are two then questions that follow from that. One is to what how do we devote ourselves to getting the analysis performed? How can that analysis be done? By whom? With what type of data? That's sort of a how do we do it concept. And then in the context of the way the city functions, and this commission is an example, is how do we fit a data analysis process into the advisory structure that the city uses? To go to that last question first, I would say, what Bob Burden and I had spent a lot of time on was looking to see what other jurisdictions nearby do in this regard, in terms of, is there an advisory board? Is there a commission? How is that done? And it seems very common that there is a special advisory structure that was put in place for this concept in other jurisdictions in the county and elsewhere. My own suggestion there would be that we don't need to have a brand new advisory body to be created for this. I think that just creates more confusion and more divergence of energies. And as Jim has pointed out a few times, we're having a little trouble getting maybe some of the existing commissions with enough bodies and enough time for people who are willing to devote. And obviously Jim's doing a great job in a lot of places. But so to me, addressing that situation, I think that the proper place on the advisory structure side for this function, if we move forward with it, would be this commission, would be the FAC. I think it ties right into so much of what we're doing here, and I think that this commission would have a good bird's eye view of the different financial aspects. So my recommendation would be we should not be spending time on how do we create some new advisory structure, but how do we bring this new concept into this commission? The hardest question to answer is how we develop the expertise in the data itself. And I know that Jody had to run, so we really can't get too far in front of that situation without her, and I think without the city manager's input. But my perspective on what we have really been unable to grapple with in this spending affordability area is just a very fundamental question. Since I do think there's a consensus that it should be done, and I would recommend, and I don't think there should be opposition, that this commission take on the advisory side of that. The only question comes down to, is this a function that can be pulled together by existing staff? Is it something that we would need a new staff person to take on, or is it something that is best contracted out? And that all comes back to the affordability of developing the support for the spending affordability data analysis. This presentation we just had from Alderman Chanmeyer was absolutely excellent. Jody pointed out that it is only one source of revenue. So to finish kind of where I'm coming from, like I see, for example, that Upper West Street, which I've seen develop over the years. There's been a lot of improvement. There's also a lot of vacant land and and buildings there that seem to be almost waiting for a repurposing. That may well be an area that could be, and that leads right up to Park Place, right? So that may well be an area that could be ripe for the type of development that I think Alderman Schantermeyer was getting at. At the same time, there are adjacent neighborhoods that are on the more affluent side and on the more economically challenged side. And what his study showed us is, we can get maybe a little more bang for the acreage in the way the housing structure is set up, townhouses, things of that nature. But where does it all fit with this notion of tax revenue, spending habits of residents? People who have more financial resources are likely to be much more the users of the downtown services, restaurants, etc. So we do need a mix, and so it does seem like we need a way to pull all of that data together from a more holistic point of view. So for me, the ultimate issue here comes down to, is it a potential staff function? And if so, I doubt that we're going to hear when staff can be available to focus in on this. I doubt we're going to hear that we have people sitting around with nothing to do and we'd be just, hoping that somebody would come up with a new task, right? We're probably going to hear we really need somebody dedicated to this, and that would make sense because it probably does take some specialized skills. And then the other option is to contract it out. And I have a view on that, but I think that's a real subject to debate. So I'll get out of the way now because I hope I've kind of summarized where I think the issues are, and maybe I'm gonna, if it's okay, steal just a little bit of Alderman Arnett's thunder, which is, I think it's long past time that we act, right? We long ago made recommendations. I think I'm happy to kind of take where we were and try to write up something that fine tunes where we were the last time we wrote out a general recommendation. But I think we need to kind of come together with the staff of the city on, should it be in-house? Should it be farmed out? Is it farmed out for a period of time and then brought in-house? Things of that nature, I think, really need to be kicked around and get particularized.
Thank you very much, Ed, for for those comments. Let me tell you, and I don't disagree. I just have one concern, and that is this is an advisory function, and how much of this is going to be spinning wheels and given lip service by the administration, by the council, by the mayor, who I'm talking not this mayor, this council, but just generically. Because what I'm weary of is having having consultants, having staff spending a lot of time trying to pull together analyses on an ongoing basis, and then they go nowhere. That is a concern of mine. Alderman Arnett, do you have any comments?
Yes, very, very quickly, and I'll address the last one first. I think that we put in the budget process in Title 6 that the part of the budget process is a consideration of the spending affordability recommendations. And I think I've been prepared to do that for a long time. Ed's comments are music to my ears. I think they should have been sung 5, maybe even 10 years ago, back at the beginning of the fact. But we need some spending discipline. The council has always approved budgets where spending is increasing by the budget numbers twice as fast as the revenue. Part of that is our conservative way of budgeting, where we not grossly, but seriously underestimate revenues because we don't count it till we get it in hand, and we overestimate spending. The departments have always been pretty fiscally responsible and spent less than their budget. The other part of that, though, is we've had an increasing reliance on grant funding, and that is a pretty unstable foundation to build a budget on. But the other reason that we've been able to get away with doing this is our property tax asset base has been growing significantly. And that means even without raising taxes, we can generate a lot more money. 2/3 of our revenue, unlike the county and the state, comes from property tax. So we've been able to do that. But we also, as Schalnemeyer's study shows, have not had to face all of these impending infrastructure bills that are going to start coming due. And so that day of reckoning is on the horizon. I also think that having the spending affordability numbers are very important when we negotiate with our employees and in the union contracts and say, look, we want to recruit you and retain you, but our resources are constrained by our expectations, and our expectations are also flavored by the projections that we've done about the infrastructure debt that's coming to us fairly quickly. I would argue that we put that in the Title VI. I do think the fact is the right place to monitor it. I do think that there is an obvious choice, which is the state and the county both use one vendor. They've been doing it for years. I think that vendor will be able to adjust to the city resources. We're more heavy on property tax than the county and the state. But I think that can be put into place fairly quickly. I think the cost of that is nominal to purchase from that vendor. I do think that, Ed, you're right. There probably needs to be at least some portion of a staff person in finance who would be assigned to look at this as a part of the budget process. And so there's one budget person, Katie Conley, who's excellent, but who is overburdened. And I think that a recommendation would be that there be another person that would support that to look at this function. But I think it can be done very quickly. I think it's long, long overdue. And I think that the one thing that we really need is a solid recommendation from the FACT to the council. You are advisory to us. I guarantee you the second I get it, I will be putting together legislation and asking for funding to go out and get a competitive process. And we'll never have staff that will be able to do internally what these outside vendors, there's more than one, but there's really a principal one, which is actually an amalgamation of 5 different vendors, a lot of them associated with parts of the University of Maryland. So I think it can happen very quickly. I think it needed to happen a long time ago, but please, let's have a recommendation from the FACT that gives me the power, the powder to fire off some legislation. There's more to say, but I'm trying to be.
I appreciate that. And go ahead, Jim.
Sorry. I was wondering if within the budget function in the finance department, I know Jody's not here to speak about this. There is a person, or that there would be a position tasked with this forecasting type of activity internally. I would concur that I would rather see the position handled internally rather than through an external feature, because a lot of it depends on making assumptions, and I think those assumptions need to come from within city management, and the facts role should be to challenge those assumptions and to have the city defend those assumptions as reasonable and accurate. I don't think a replica of a Blue Ribbon Commission to do this function would work. I think it needs to be kind of baked into the city's finance department, because it is crucial to the financial health and welfare of the city, is to engage in something beyond the current budget cycle.
Jim, are you suggesting that it not involve an outside consultant?
No, I think it should be inherent within the finance department to have someone to take at the conclusion of the budget year, to take all the budget items that are kind of recurring in nature and say, okay, these are recurring, these are going to happen next year and the year after that and the year after that, and these are the escalations that are going to occur on staffing and benefits, et cetera. And you're going to have that forecasting piece budget process. It kind of flows out from the budget process.
But
So I would like to see it as part of the finance department's functions. And then on a periodic basis, that department would be coming back to the fact and saying, here's our 5-year projections on spending, and here's our 5-year projections on revenue and sources, and that should be inherent within city finance department.
I agree. I think that makes absolutely perfect sense. And I think it actually ties into, not that we're going to have too much of a side discussion on this, but it actually ties into some of the issues and concerns we've been raising on the collective bargaining side.
Exactly,
right?
because that
it all
3-year
connects.
agreement, right? That 3-year agreement, everyone looked at it, and city council included, everyone looked at it within the context of the existing single budget for FY25, not what kind of burdens it puts on city finances the next 3 years.
But if we
My
do this,
suggestion- Go ahead, Ross.
if we purchase the vendor that I have in mind, and there are others, but it just makes sense to use the same vendor that the state and the county are using. The difference will be the mix of the revenue sources, but we can really be very vertically integrated and consistent. The budget is driven currently, the way it's formulated, by spending. We project the spending not very far out, really, and we don't really account for these infrastructure kinds of liabilities that are coming due. That all comes from the book Strong Towns and things like that, and it is not necessarily at the forefront of our minds. So it isn't this 5-year outlook. I would argue that the value of the fact involvement here is there's 5 different vendors. They all make assumptions, and those assumptions need to be looked at. Every one of the times that the county gets their advisory from this group, their recommendation is that spending growth really should be somewhere between 2 and 4%, and yet the county spends more. So no matter what we do, no matter how well intended, no matter how good the models, it's still going to be the city and the city finance director and city manager that are going to make the decision on the budget. I will just point to this year's budget exercise, where the mayor came in with what I viewed as a very responsible $188 million budget. But there was money on the table, this one-time only money, and the council made that budget $194 million. And without any looking to, for example, the predicted immediate failure of funding for our transportation department. I argued that we should have taken all that one-time only money and put it aside to help finance the finance department. That was not accepted by the council. But we need some other kinds of guidance, parental guidance, if you will, to say you just can't be profligate. When politicians see money on the table, they spend it. And there has to be some kind of constraint. And the whole purpose, to my mind, of the fact, starting with the Blue Ribbon Commission, is to be that outside sage council that are not involved in the immediate fray that say, but have you thought about this? And these are other concerns that are going on. And that's why I've always thought that the fact really has value. I'm ashamed and disappointed that it isn't more closely followed, but I guarantee you, we listened to the fact when we were facing bankruptcy. And when some of these big infrastructure bills start coming due, I think we'll be listening to the fact again and any other resource. Right now, we've been on easy street. It's been easy to do the budgets, finance them. And that day may well come to an end. And by the way, this predicating so much of our budget on grant money, I think that day is coming to an end at all levels, state and federal, because they're also facing financial realities, and they may not be able to provide us CHIPS money and ARPA money and all of these other kinds of things. And in fact, there may be an administration that isn't interested in doing any of that. So being on that soft foundation of having those grant funding, I think, is serious concern.
Thank you, Ross. I was gonna say my suggestion, oh, Frank, I see your hands up. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Listening to all of this and taking into consideration what we need, that to me, there's no question whether it's additional staff to the finance office or whether we do an outside consultant. This analysis needs to be done and this information needs to be provided. But to your point, Fred, Ross, is there a will or a consensus within the council to do anything about it?
That is the $64 million question. We won't know until we draft legislation and see. Frankly, I think there is, I do think my colleagues are very responsible. We have this play money, this one-time only money. And I do think that a lot of it is going to things that are unmet needs. And a lot of those are social program needs that we, I think, have ignored far too much and for far too long. But Ed phrased it, things we must do and things we would like to do. And those discretionary things are the things that have to be on the table first to consider, can we do this at the expense of having roads that are impassable or infrastructure things?
And I agree with what Ed said too. I mean, breaking it down even further, you have absolute necessities and you have needs. Which are prioritizing? Which do I need first, water or food or air? You got to prioritize these things. And listening to this conversation and getting the different bits and pieces, it doesn't seem like anybody's willing to address it. I mean, you can't just leave it there and think it's going to cure itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ross.
I will just say that, as I said before, financial realities bring people's attention to focus fairly quickly. When there's easy money on the table, it's easy to spend it. And we have. And that day will come to a close. There may be another glory period sometime down the road, but the value of the study that Brooks got commissioned is these are long-term realities that are in the near forefront and are going to impinge on us more quickly than people would like to assume. And things like the transportation department projected in fiscal 26 to come up $2.5 million short is going to be one of those immediate responsibility fiscal realities, and that we did not set aside $2.5 million of the one-time only money to do that, I think was short-sighted. But it isn't a crisis because the buses are still running. Politicians react in crisis just like people do. We're no different. And when the rubber meets the road, when the crisis is there, I think it's going to be very valuable to have what are our potential resources, what are our potential spending liabilities that we don't normally account for, but are growing in importance. I thought that suggestion that Jody made about involving public works in this process is essential. That's where the big infrastructure things are. So this is all going to have to be done within the context of the city and the city finance director and the department heads, but having this model of some sort and having the council of the external body like the Financial Advisory Commission, I think is going to make it work better. And
And Ross, I feel like you get it. And I think you understand. And what you're saying to me is that they are always reactive as opposed to proactive. The train is coming down the track and we're still standing on it.
right.
Okay, I think, that the next step is to continue this discussion with staff, with the city manager and with the finance director, to kind of share some of the thoughts and get their input, before we start putting anything in writing. And hopefully we can get, some ideas from them or some consensus from them as to a way to proceed. And then once we have that, then I can take you, Ed, up on your suggestion that you pull together, what we've been talking about, what you did before, and begin the process of putting together something that we can present to the council.
I would argue this is a policy matter and therefore is the province of the council. And that a recommendation from the fact to the council, that is your role advisory to us, allows us to get the ball rolling. We will be the ones, of course, the fact should be involved, to have a discussion with the administration. There's been a long resistance on the part of the administration to have this outside influence. And I have some speculation about it, but I think this is policy. It's not budgeting, it's policy. And I would urge that the fact make recommendation to the council and then we jointly talk with the administration. Of course, the administration of the ultimate authority are going to have to do this, but it's because we haven't enacted a policy that we've never done anything on this.
Okay.
Fred, if it's okay if I just throw in a thought that maybe helps us get to a little closure for today, which is, I go back to the point that I started with. I don't think there's any disagreement, at least among us, among this group, over the wisdom of having this concept implemented in some fashion. I think that we absolutely cannot get in front of staff by trying to decide the particulars of how it is implemented. And, do we use an outside consultant for a limited aspect or a period of time? Or, those are what I view as the more granular details. But the concept itself, I think we have endorsed in the past. So maybe my suggestion or expectation, however you want to look at it, would be that yes, we should have, if possible, at the next meeting, real focus on the particulars, air out any concerns or anticipated problems that anybody might see or that the staff could identify. But I guess my expectation would be that after that next meeting, whenever we can have it, whether it's August or September, that we would put together something that gives Ross what he needs so that he can champion this. And I'm happy to, write that up and obviously for input and circulation. But that's kind of where I see this is going. I think it's time that we put it right out there as, yes, we do think this should be done. And then it can be hopefully implemented in one fashion or another, but start moving us down the right path.
Okay, I stand corrected then, or my thought has changed. You two guys have conclusively demonstrated to me how my thinking was wrong. So I think good discussion today. Let's continue it at the next meeting, and then hopefully we'll be in a position where you feel comfortable that you have what you need to begin writing something up for us to look at, present to the council. Sound like a plan by consensus, everybody?
And
Sure.
I'm
I agree.
available if you
I agree.
wanted any discussion anytime, so.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that'd be great.
Ross, greatly appreciate your time and your effort on this too. Almost consider you as an auxiliary member of the CPAC. We're in several hats here. So, that having been said, any other discussion on this topic?
No.
Nope. Okay. I think that concludes our business for today. I have a next meeting tentatively scheduled for August 8th, and that will involve continuation of this discussion and discussion and recommendation on the bond ordinance, which was introduced Monday night and referred to the commission. Any comments? If not, entertain a motion to adjourn, and everybody have a great weekend and great summer, healthy and safe. So who wants to second all that? Jim?
I was,
All right. Discussion, hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye or raising the right hand. Okay,
Aye.
we are adjourned.